Hello, and welcome back to another rant about a Discord conversation that I had. So, this guy joined my Discord server. He claims to be vegan. I would not classify him as such, but that's another story. We'll get to that in a while. Um, and first, he wanted to ask me about, anti-natalism and freeganism and whatnot, and my ethics and stuff. So I said that I'm a threshold deontologist, and I think freeganism should be avoided since it perpetuates the idea that animals and their secretions are food, which we don't want. Like, we don't want to give the people that idea. That is what we want to get away from. So if we keep consuming their bodies, even if it is, in a situation where you haven't killed them yourself, even if they have died for some other reason, and you are not causing them any harm or suffering by eating their dead body, even then, I think we should avoid doing it as far as is possible and practicable, because it perpetuates the idea that we see animals as food, as resources, and that mindset perpetuates the animal holocaust. So, yeah, I think we should avoid it. And he asked me if I'm like a negative utilitarian and if I subscribe to David Benatar's theory about the symmetry of suffering, which I don't know much about. But yeah, my stance is that, I want to prevent suffering as much as possible. And that is my primary concern. So here he's asking me, but who is being harmed? Like, whose rights are being violated by us eating an animal that has died for some other reason, when we are not causing them any harm by eating their dead body? Like, if you're not paying for it in a grocery store or whatever, let's say you get meat out of a dumpster or something that has been thrown away and you consume that. If in a vacuum where nobody else finds out about it and you're just doing it for yourself, sure, there's no ethical problem. You're not causing any harm. You're not sending others the message, because they don't see it. Like, you're not sending them the message that animals are food, that you see animals as food, as resources, etc. So I would not do it myself because I think it's disgusting, but sure, in that scenario, I don't really have an ethical problem with it. But that is not really the scenario that he is, describing here, because, he thinks it's justified to do it, even if other people know about it. He thinks we should use the dead bodies of animals who have died for, various reasons, as long as we are not, causing their suffering and death while they are alive. But if they die from being killed by a vehicle, or if they get killed by the meat industry and then their bodies get thrown away, etc., he thinks we should use their bodies and secretions as food, not in secrecy, but publicly, and we should use that to feed people and whatnot. And as I already explained, I am against that because it perpetuates the idea that animals are resources, that you see them as food. And, the more people who see animals as resources, as food, the more other people are going to do the same, because, humans copy each other. And, it normalizes and perpetuates this idea that, animals are resources and food. And I think we should get as far away from that as possible, which is why I think we should not consume their bodies and secretions at all. Just like we wouldn't consume the bodies and secretions of other humans, right? Because they are not food. They are individuals. Even if they are dead, their bodies are not food. That is my stance. And so this guy can't see how it perpetuates the suffering of animals, as I see it. He argues that no, it's not going to have any effect on what other people choose to do. It's not going to normalize or perpetuate the idea that they are resources and food. And But he doesn't really see a problem with perpetuating that idea. He only sees a problem with, the farming them and killing them and stuff like that, I guess. So I argue that, this is the reason why they suffer. This is the reason why they are killed, why we farm them, why we use them as resources, because people see them as resources, because they see them as food. And if we perpetuate that idea, it's just going to take longer for us to end this Holocaust. It's just going to take longer for us to get them rights, So I asked him if he feels the same way about eating humans. And he's like, no, I don't think we should do it with humans. I don't think we should eat the dead bodies of humans because that can cause human suffering while they are still alive because they know that their bodies might be eaten and that will worsen their quality of life. And that he wants his own body to be fed to other animals, And sure, if you want your own body to be fed to animals, that's fine. It's your body. You make the decisions over your own body, but you don't get to make the decisions over the bodies of others. Like, that's the problem. So then I asked him the same about another scenario. Like, what if when women died naturally, we preserved their bodies, turned their bodies into sex dolls for men to use to have sex with because they enjoy it? Would that be okay since nobody's rights are being violated? Since, they are already dead, so you can't violate their rights because they as a person do not exist anymore. Only their body exists, right? So would that be okay? And there again, he argues that no, because, they would know about that. The women would know about that while they are alive, so they would worry about what their own bodies are going to be used for after they're dead, which will worsen their quality of life. So clearly he cares about, the consequences of, such actions. Even if nobody's rights are being violated, he cares about the suffering that is caused as a result of that action. So then I argue that, yeah, but it worsens the animal's quality of life, that you perpetuate the idea that animals are food, because that means people will keep eating animals for longer, which means the animal holocaust will go on for longer. Just like with any other human behavior, the more humans that participate in a certain behavior, the more other humans are also going to participate in that behavior. Because, the more people who do it, the more other people think, oh, but they're doing it, so I should do it too. Like, I could do it too. It's okay, right? And that's the problem with eating the dead bodies of animals, even if you are not violating anyone's rights by eating them. Because, yeah, you're perpetuating the idea that animals are resources. And if you eat animal products, then you're just going to encourage other people to keep doing it as well. Because if someone is surrounded by people who eat animal products, the chances are they will also continue to eat animal products. Whereas if that person was surrounded only by people who are against animal exploitation and cruelty, and who don't even see animals as resources, who only eat plants, the chances are much, much bigger that the person eating animals will stop doing that and, start doing what the others are doing instead. Just eating plants and not seeing animals as resources. And then he went on to argue about how I would delete the entire universe or all humans if I could with a button. And he's like, oh, but then you would be preventing the vegan world that could result if we let this keep going, if we keep fighting. And eventually somewhere in the future we have a vegan world, and he argues that it would be better. Like, all the suffering that happens up until that point is better than if we just stop all that suffering right now. Because he argues that, in such a world, in a vegan world where everybody respects animals and cares about animals and whatnot, the world will have less suffering because, if humans are a part of it, because we can actively help other species, we can help prevent suffering instead of causing it. And while I agree with that, in, a perfect world where all humans, care about other animals, they do not violate their rights, they do not cause them any suffering. We're in a world where every human tries to prevent this, suffering for others as much as possible, it would be better if we had a world with humans than a world without humans, because there would be less suffering. But that only works in theory, right? The question is, could we ever get there in practice? And today, we definitely are very, very far from that in practice. So, and because of all the suffering that is going on right now and will continue to go on for a long, long time, I would, to prevent that suffering for all those individuals who will be forced into existence to suffer and die, I would delete, all humans, or preferably the entire universe, to prevent them all from being, forced into that life of suffering and death. And at this part of the conversation, he more switches to because he seemed to care about suffering at first, but now he's doesn't seem to care about it at all. It seems like purely deontological. Like he's only concerned about the ethics of the action itself, but he doesn't care about the consequences. Like with his imaginary vegan world that he wants. All he wants is to get there no matter at which cost, no matter how much suffering it requires to get there, no matter how many have to die before we reach that world. He still thinks, that suffering should continue. It's better that the suffering and death continues until we reach that point than if we just stop it all right now. And for me, I strongly disagree with that, because what about all the individuals who are suffering right now and will suffer their entire lives until they are killed? And that will happen to so many, countless animals until we reach a point, if we ever reach it. I don't think we can get there, because I don't think humans are capable of being such good individuals. I just think the vast majority of humans, they are too egocentric for that to ever happen. But even if it was possible, even if we could get there, that doesn't prevent the individuals who are currently alive. That doesn't prevent their suffering. That doesn't prevent the suffering of everyone who will be forced into existence and suffer their entire lives and then be killed. And it doesn't prevent their suffering at all. So what about their suffering? Why doesn't their suffering count? I don't think nothing can be worth that suffering, No matter how good the future is, in some optimal scenario, I don't think, imagine this. What if you were the animal suffering right now in a factory farm or whatever? Your entire life was just constant suffering. You were stuck in a cage, just constant, nothing but suffering. Your life not worth living at all. Would you not want that to end? If you were in that situation, would you not want someone to just press a button, delete the entire universe to spare you from that suffering? Would you not? Or would you be like, nah, I'll happily just suffer for my entire life so that humans somewhere can continue to enjoy existence? No, at that point, all you can care about is yourself, your own well-being, and you would do anything to end that suffering. And we have to put ourselves in their position. How the fuck do you think they feel? Do you think they're okay with this? Do you think all the countless of trillions of animals, the infinite trillions of animals pretty much, who will be killed until we reach this vegan world, if we ever reach it, do you think they're fine with that suffering? Do you think they want to endure that entire life of suffering just so that us humans can have a beautiful future, somewhere in the future? No. All they care about themselves. They just don't want to suffer, okay? They just want their own suffering to end. And that is why I would, if I had a button, I would delete the entire universe right now, because that would prevent that suffering from them. That would spare them from that suffering, from that horrible life. And there are so many individuals experiencing that life right now. So, like, because I would want someone to do the same for me. If I was in their situation, I would want someone to delete the entire universe to spare me from that suffering, without a doubt. Because it's fucking horrible. It's like hell. Who the hell wants to go through hell just so that someone else can enjoy existence? I certainly do not. And this brought us to the topic of anti-natalism, because obviously, no surprise there, he is a natalist, so he thinks we should continue to breed humans into existence to, reach our own selfish goals or whatever. Like, I argue that it is immoral to, breed someone into existence. It is immoral to procreate, but because the one you're forcing into existence can't consent to it. And you are creating a lot of suffering from them, suffering that they would not experience if you just decided to not force them into existence in the first place. And so his response to that is that, well, they don't exist yet, so you can't violate their rights. Like, the one you bring into existence, they do not exist at the time of conception, when you are having sex, when the sperm enters the egg, when, a woman becomes pregnant. That sentience does not yet exist, therefore you cannot violate their rights, and therefore it is justified, regardless of what suffering is caused as a result. And what he's saying is like, oh, but you're just assuming that life is suffering without zero evidence. And like, no, I know that certain people enjoy life. I know that many enjoy life, but then there are also many who don't. There are many whose life are mostly suffering. There are many humans who wish they were never born. Like me, my life is mostly suffering. I would rather not have been born. I did not consent to it. So my mom has forced me to live a life of suffering for her own selfish desires, and I did not consent to that. Obviously, I couldn't consent to that because I didn't exist when she made the choice to create me. But here I am now, suffering as a consequence of her choice. So by continuing to breed, you will inevitably create such humans who will suffer, and all that suffering is on you. You created that suffering. That suffering will only exist because you chose to procreate, because you chose to create sentient life for your own selfish desires. So at this point of the conversation, suddenly he has stopped caring about, suffering that is caused as a result of, his choices and whatnot. And he's only trying to justify, breeding in the first place by saying that you can't violate the rights of someone who does not yet exist. Therefore, it is justified. And he doesn't care about the suffering that is created as a result of that action. Whereas before, he did care about the suffering that is caused as a result of certain actions. Like with the example of preserving women's dead bodies to use them as sex dolls or whatever. Then he did care, because the action itself isn't violating anyone's rights, but it causes others suffering as a result. That he did care about. But suddenly when we get to anti-natalism, breeding more humans into existence, then he just stops caring about suffering all of a sudden. Then it's all about the action itself, the action of procreating, which he deems is not wrong because you are not violating anyone's rights, because at the time you're procreating, the one who will exist as a result does not exist yet, therefore it's justified. And it's like, so at this point I'm wondering, like, okay, so do you care about suffering or do you not? And he starts saying, this is mental illness, I'm mentally ill. That's why I'm saying this. I'm just like, yeah, sure, I'm mentally ill. I am suffering from depression, from loneliness, if you want to call that mental illness, sure. I am suffering as a result of my mother who chose to force me into existence for her own selfish desires. It's like, that's the result of breeding. I was created as a result of breeding. I am suffering as a result of breeding. That's my entire point. And he's like, so you acknowledge that you have mental illness, yet not that the ideas spewing out of your mouth are as a result of it. So he's trying to invalidate my points by saying I'm mentally ill, therefore my points are invalid. Because I'm suffering from depression, because I'm suffering from loneliness, because I have a death wish. Therefore, my arguments are suddenly invalid, which is a very fallacious argument to make. And he argues that, even if he did choose to procreate, even if he choose to force other humans into existence, the suffering they will experience is somehow out of his control, because he can't predict what will happen to the human in their life. But it's like, no, it's not out of your control, because you're the one who chose to create that human in the first place. They only exist because you chose to create them. All the suffering they will ever experience in their entire life is a result of you creating them. You can prevent all the potential suffering in their life by not breeding them into existence in the first place. So no, none of it is out of your control. All of it is a result of your action. All of it is a result of you choosing to force another human into existence just because you want to. And at this point, he's just passionately trying to find a justification for bringing them into existence in the first place, even though it's completely unnecessary, and even though that will inevitably lead to suffering. Like, you are creating suffering by breeding. So it doesn't matter how much you try to justify that, because that suffering will still exist. That suffering will still be there. And that suffering is a result of your choice to breed. But at this point, it seems like they don't care about suffering at all anymore. All they care about is justifying the act of breeding a human into existence in the first place. And then they copied and pasted long, paragraphs trying to justify bringing the person into existence in the first place, completely ignoring all the suffering that is caused as a result. And this is the problem with breeding. Like, you are creating suffering. You are unnecessarily creating suffering just because you want to bring another sentient being into existence. And you want that sentient being to come out of your own body. Like, you could just take care of someone who already exists instead. Nobody can suffer from not existing. The human you want to create, who does not yet exist, they cannot suffer from you not bringing them into existence. So why would you need to bring them into existence in the first place? Just because you want... You like this idea of them potentially being able to enjoy life. But it's like, why not take someone who's already suffering? Take care of them. Give them a better life. Help them enjoy life. Why do you have to create more life? Why does that life have to come out of your body? That is so egocentric. Like, there is no good reason to do that. The only reason you could have for wanting to have your own biological child that comes out of your body is because it's purely egocentric reasons. There's no argument you can give to say that you are doing it for someone else. You're not doing it for the person you're bringing into existence because they don't exist yet. As you said, they did not ask to be born. They have not asked to be born. They can't ask to be born because they don't exist yet. And then when you have forced them into existence, and let's say they are one of those people whose life is mostly filled with suffering, then all that suffering was created by you just because you wanted to bring them into existence. And so you can just easily prevent that by not breeding. It is so unnecessary. So at this point, I'm really confused. Like, do you care about suffering or do you not? Because it seems like it's just switching back and forth. In the first stage of the conversation, he cared about suffering. But then we got to anti-natalism and he doesn't care about suffering anymore. It's like, it's so confusing. Like, it's so inconsistent. He's just contradicting himself. Like, at one point, he's concerned about the suffering that is caused as a consequence of an action. And at the other, at another point, he's only concerned about justifying the action itself and completely ignoring the consequences. So it's like, how are you going to have it? Do you care about suffering or do you not? Like, you can't just switch back and forth between, different, ethics just because it's convenient. Because then you are not being consistent. Because then you are contradicting yourself. And how is anyone supposed to take you seriously if you can't even stay consistent with your own arguments? And yeah, that was the end of our conversation, and I'm just like, oh, like, because at this point I think he's purely deontological, so he only cares. That's what it seems like towards the end, even though in the beginning, you know, he seemed to care about suffering, but then we get to anti-natalism and it doesn't care about suffering. Like, oh my god, I do not understand purely deontological people. Like, how do you not care about suffering? Is it because you have never suffered yourself? Do you not know what it is like to suffer? Why do you not want to prevent that at all costs? I do not understand that. And by breeding, you are only creating more suffering. There is no need for you to create more sentient beings. There are so many sentient beings already alive who are suffering. You could help them. You could prevent them suffering and help them enjoy life. And then you wouldn't have to... Like, that would be so much better than breeding yourself and creating more life. Because then that individual that you could have helped to enjoy life, they will continue to suffer. And with a big risk, the one you created will also suffering. So it's just more suffering. Why would you want to create more suffering when you can instead help reduce suffering? Because that's what breeding does. It only creates more suffering, both for, everyone else on the planet, because more humans equals more suffering for everyone, because all humans affect the environment, and they have a footprint, and you kill animals by consuming resources and blah 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 blah. And then on top of that, the one you're bringing into existence, they will also suffer. I mean, everyone suffers at some point. Different people suffer different amounts, but if you're unlucky, that person you brought into existence is just gonna mostly suffer and not enjoy life at all, like me. So then you have just created more unnecessary suffering. And why would you want to do that? But yeah, I'm gonna wrap up the video here because I've been talking for a long time. I just wanted to rant about this because it makes me so frustrated. People who do not care about the consequences of their action, the suffering that is caused as a result of what they do. And it's like, surprise, surprise, most such people are natalists. They don't see a problem with bringing new life into existence because, yeah, what can I say? They're egocentric. All they care about is feeling good about themselves. As long as they are acting in a way that they think is moral, as long as they feel good about themselves, as long as they can justify their own actions, they don't really care about the consequences of those actions. They don't really care about what everyone else is doing, what suffering everybody else is causing. Because, they're not causing it themselves. Even though when you breed, you are causing that suffering yourself, because you're the one who brought them into existence in the first place. They wouldn't be able to suffer if you didn't create them. So you can't really blame that on someone else. Like, sure, it's unnecessary for someone to cause suffering to the one you brought into existence, but they wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't bring them into existence in the first place. Like, oh my god. Anyway, thank you for watching my rant about this. So, moral of the story, you should care about suffering, and you should not breed, because nobody wants to suffer. So why shouldn't we try to reduce suffering? Why shouldn't we try to prevent suffering? By all means. That's how I feel, which is why, if I had a button, I would delete the entire universe right now, because that would eliminate all suffering permanently. If we assume that, the universe wouldn't somehow be recreated and whatnot. But yeah, it would end all suffering. And I don't see why anybody wouldn't want to do that.